Today we check out the best Sony OLED for many of you, the Bravia 8. Up next.
I've seen things people wouldn't believe.
Now, why do I say the Bravia 8 is the best Sony OLED for most people? Well, the Sony A95L exists. The Quantum Dot OLED from Sony is the returning champ of the Value Electronics King of TVs shootout in 2024. It also won in 2023. However, it is still quite expensive, and the Bravia 8 delivers amazing picture quality for a fraction of the cost. And a lot like the Bravia 7 that we just covered last week, I do feel that the Bravia 8 has been overlooked, much like the A80J, A80K, and the A80L. I personally own the A80J and the A80L, and they're absolutely amazing and something you shouldn't miss out on when you think about choosing your next TV. Without further ado, let's check out the Sony Bravia 8 OLED. Thank you so much for watching. All right, guys, let's do it. Sony Bravia 8 OLED, we have the 65-inch here today. Now, the Bravia 8 is not new to me. I spent time with it in LA before it was announced and then did a review of it 2 weeks before its launch at Value Electronics. I am revisiting the Bravia 8 as I do feel, much like the A80J, A80K, and A80L, that it's a TV that is overlooked, and I wanted to revisit it. Now, for the Bravia 8 or the 80 series OLEDs in general, I do know they're overlooked because I've purchased them. I purchased the 77 A80J and the 83-inch A80L. We're going to do a very quick unboxing and show you the new design of the Bravia 8, what sets it apart from the OLEDs of the past from Sony. This will be the fastest unboxing in history. As we take a look at the Bravia 8, this was sent to me by Value Electronics. As you see the Bravia 7 in the back at 75 inches, as well as the Theater Bar 9. That will come in handy in a second as we show you the design and the foot positions of the Bravia 8. Now, within the box, you have your remote, screws for the stand, manual detachable power cable. You also have some cable management for the back. I'll show you that when we're done putting it together. And then you have the more flush feet than the bulkier feet from last year. And you have different positions, which I'll show you in a moment. The TV is well packaged, but be mindful that though it has the plastic bag, it does not have plastic on the screen, so be careful. Quick look at the HDMI ports. You have 4 HDMI, only 2 HDMI 2.1 capable of 4K 120. Now you can also see the different positions. This is the easiest TV to put together. It does feel very premium. It is very heavy as well. It has the granular back that used to be set aside for the Sony Master Series. The same blue speckled remote you've seen on the other Sony TVs this year. You have your wall mounting options. Again, the TV feels very premium. More cable management. I'll show you that when it's fully assembled. The TV feels very premium, but the stand is one of the easiest I've ever assembled. Basically, line it up, push up, and it locks in using those notches, and you have your different positions. You can have out wide or more narrow, which you'll see me use during the review. Or you can have them elevated to make room for a soundbar, which I'll show you with the Theater Bar 9 momentarily. But they're very easy to install. and again, feel very premium. Now, once you install the legs, if you don't like the look of it, you can experiment. It's so easy to unlock them and reconnect them. Just use a magnetic screwdriver because the screws are a little tricky to get out. And it's simple as moving them around. I don't recommend having them in this elevated stance unless you do have a soundbar. The TV is actually very stable, even being elevated. It just looks a little silly without a soundbar. Here is the covering that goes over the back of the legs. I also installed the HDMI cover, which you can barely see. It looks great covered. The wires would come out underneath. Then you also have those covers if you decide to mount the TV and not use the legs. Overall, I do like the design quite a bit. It does feel more sturdy and more premium than the thin OLED with a thick back. Now you can tell in this elevated stance, the legs are more flush than the years past. This is to make room for a soundbar, not just the clearance, but to go over the legs using the risers on the Theater Bar 9 or other soundbars. It fits perfectly underneath. Very minimalist Sony logo on there. Theater Bar 9 sounds incredible, but I love this setup. Where years past it would have sit on top of the legs, and see here how the legs are a little bit more flush there. Now we have a glossy panel, which I prefer, and then a sleek silver design on the sides. The thickness is pretty uniform from top to bottom. Here it is in comparison to the larger Bravia 7 Mini LED. Now there are the chunky legs on the Sony A80L. And then the design of the OLEDs where they were thin at the top but very bulky at the back. What you have from the Bravia 8 is a more uniform thickness from top to bottom. Now here is the Bravia 8 in my sunlit room. We'll do most of this video with the sun kind of hitting the screen. Reflections on a glossy screen aren't the best, but I do prefer the glossiness. Keeps the contrast ratio intact. And the TV is bright enough to combat this. You'll see it right in front of you. It looks incredible, very three-dimensional. And after doing mini LEDs for the last few months, turning on the Bravia 8 was a breath of fresh air. I love mini LEDs, but there's something about an OLED. Now, as I said, I'm not a stranger to the Bravia 8, spent a lot of time with it. I know what I'm seeing, and I love the TV. It looks fantastic, again, being somebody who owns the previous models. As I mentioned, the design is very premium and very thought out. It's also a heavier TV than a lot of other competing OLEDs. And I mention this because being premium, there is a cost to this. We constantly hear Sony tax thrown around. However, we want those things for free. To me, the build quality, the sound quality, these things, especially the processing, are worth the difference in price. Speaking of price, the Bravia 8 is in line with its main competition, the LG C4 and the Samsung S90D QD OLED. Now you can see, even though it is in a very bright room, you can see the reflections, but look how gorgeous the image is. The color, the depth, the micro contrast of an OLED, even the WOLED, is very hard to beat. Now we've gotten pretty spoiled with micro lens array OLEDs and quantum dot OLEDs. I mentioned the A80L, and the other models have always sat in the shadow of Master Series A90J and then the A95K and the A95L. But everyone tends to circle back to the A80s and now the Bravia 8. That's why I'm revisiting this TV. What's funny is we either swing for the fences at the very highest end, or we go all the way down the ladder to pure value, missing some pretty amazing TVs right there in the middle, which is why I revisited the Sony Bravia 7 Mini LED. Now I'm following up with the Bravia 8. Now, seeing this TV after all the TVs I reviewed this year, and I've reviewed every major TV available, the Bravia 8 is still a standout, even though it's not quite on the level of the Sony A95L. But it's also half the price. Keep that in mind. Now, if there's a criticism for the Bravia 8 or the 80 series in general, is they're not big jumps from year to year. They're incremental upgrades. However, I'd argue that most TVs are incremental upgrades every year. But the Bravia 8 also has some controversy, as many of you think it's a step back, as it's missing smooth gradation, and some even think that perhaps the XR cognitive processor is not there. This is simply not true, and I reached out to Sony for clarification, and I did get back a response from Sony, which got a response from Sony of Japan. Now, I'll read you a quick excerpt regarding this. From Sony of Japan, although a smooth gradation slider is not present, the Bravia 8's XR processor maintains excellent gradient handling. The full suite of XR processor advantages are present: focal point analysis, depth mapping, XR clear image, XR Triluminous Pro, XR motion clarity, XR contrast booster, Prime Video Calibrated Mode, Voice Zoom 3, and more. These are only available on XR Cognitive Processor TVs. Now, why I wanted to get that clarification from Sony is that is what sets apart the Bravia 8 from the other WOLEDs in its own class. It's also a bit more expensive, especially at launch, but that processing in general is one of the most important things that TVs can offer. That's what sets Sony apart, especially the focal point analysis, the depth mapping, and XR clear image. That's what gives you the detail and the upscaling that you're seeing here. That's what's most important. Without that, yes, go with any other WOLED. But that processing is why I chose the A80L last year, and why the Bravia 8 is a great choice above its competition. Now, back to the picture quality and the processing. You have to ask yourself, do you like the manufacturer's signature? With Sony, it doesn't really matter what preset you're in. All the presets, even the most vivid preset, has a look of accuracy. Their new moniker of bringing cinema home really does shine through. Now, it's not going to be the most vibrant or off the charts, crazy looking TV, but you can keep it in almost every preset and be happy with it. With my Sony TVs, I tend to very rarely even look for the remote. The image is very even, regardless of the kind of content that's on screen. There are other TVs that are more dynamic, but I find myself constantly changing the settings, changing the presets to fit the content. Meaning I tend to leave it in something like professional, where professional is the most accurate and comparable to other manufacturers' filmmaker, but doesn't have the drab look of a filmmaker from other manufacturers. Professional takes the place of custom. That is one of the big differences, other than the UI, is custom was that preset on Sony's from last year. Now we have professional in its place. One of the differences between the A80L and the Bravia 8 is that setting, which to me also is a big difference. I do like it better than custom. A very special thanks to Value Electronics for supplying the Bravia 8 for extended review. Please consider making your next AV purchase through them. Check the description below for all their information. Let them know that Brian from Brian's Tech Therapy sent you. Thank you so much, Value Electronics. Now, as we go through the presets, you can see the new UI. You can see there's a level of accuracy regardless of the preset that we're in. But you still have that flexibility of image that I love. But even going from vivid now here to professional, both look that they have a level of accuracy and bringing the filmmaker's intent home. Also, a very special thanks to the one and only Jennifer Gala in her second channel, HDR Super Channel. Most of the content you're seeing within the intro and this video is hers. Check the description below for links to both channels, and consider becoming a Patreon member to download these demos for your new TV in full Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision. Thank you so much, Jen. Now we're going to compare the A80L on the left, which is my personal TV at 83 inches, to the Bravia 8. Now, it's 83 inches versus 65. There isn't a Bravia 8 at 83 inches. Now, though the A80L is the brightest A80L due to the A90J chassis and heatsink, you can see that even though it's much larger, the brightnesses look virtually the same. The Bravia 8 is a step above last year's A80L. Again, much larger TV, but to say that the Bravia 8 is some step back simply isn't true, as I do have them both here to compare. Again, they're not comparable sizes, that it only leads in the Bravia 8's favor. And in some shots, the Bravia 8 does have more detail. Now, yes, it is a smaller TV, so it should be cleaner, but there is a bit more detail on the Bravia 8. You'll have a full comparison video next week of these two side by side, but having them side by side right in front of you is very important to really see which is better as we compare the new UI that the A80L does not have. Now, while these differences may not seem significant, they are when people do buy a TV from the year before and then say, hey, where are these features? So these little features do add up to make up for the differences in cost. The A80L is still available and is an amazing TV and definitely something you should look for if you want better value. But these differences with the Bravia 8 is why it's not really a step back. You are getting more for your money. Also with the new UI, you have more sound optimization options. Also the center sync, using the TV as a center channel in tandem with either the quad or the bar 9 is also improved. These are differences that are there versus last year. Now we'll quickly go through the differences in the presets from the Bravia 8 and the A80L, but don't worry, you have a full comparison video coming next week of the A80L versus the Bravia 8. Now, is the Bravia 8 perfect? Of course it's not. What I'm simply showing you here is that it is an upgrade over the A80L. Now, perhaps it is an incremental upgrade, but some of these quality of life features are what people want and what people will pay for. I do enjoy the Bravia 8 a lot, considering I also have the Sony A80L, which is my TV. Stating the differences is really kind of the goal of this video, and perhaps showing you a TV that you're otherwise missing. Now keep an eye out for that comparison next week as we move into some gaming. Sony has made great strides in their gaming and improving their feature set. Now they are still behind in some aspects. They do need to incorporate more than 2 HDMI 2.1. You're also limited to 4K 120, where many other manufacturers have moved up to 144 Hz. With that said, Sony does have one of the best looking game modes in the business year after year. My biggest criticism has been the inability to really change the game mode's appearance. We do have that change this year, which also sets it apart from last year with 3 different genre presets. But for me, the settings don't change the image much. The tone mapping doesn't change the image much, whether it's brightness preferred or gradation preferred. Even live color is not nearly as impactful as it is outside of game mode. And we'll show you the game bar and the presets momentarily, but for Sony's game mode, it really is about clarity and even shadow detail with their OLEDs. What sets them apart is how clear the image is, how detailed the image is in game mode. It doesn't take a step back in terms of image quality. They did find that balance of a gorgeous game mode. Now, while it may lack within the picture settings the ability to change the image much, there really isn't much need, as it looks good regardless of game, regardless of genre, regardless of whether it's console or PC. Again, like the other presets, very even in terms of its presentation. You're not always reaching for the remote to change those genre settings or customizable settings to match the game. It is a set it and forget it. That's how Sony's signature is throughout, which is pretty impressive because they can find a way to be accurate even in a game as cartoony as what you're seeing on screen right now. Now moving into Horizon Forbidden West, we're going to go into the game bar, and there are some differences from last year, but more importantly, let's look at the genre settings. That is what's different than the year before. You have FPS, RTS, and standard. Now, RTS is probably my favorite. It does have more depth. And then standard is what it ships in. You can see the game bar here, but I want to show you quickly FPS out of the box. You see when you go to it, black equalizer there next to it is enabled at medium, which makes a lot of people look at this preset and say, forget it, I'm not using it. I recommend knocking black equalizer down to off, then you will have a brighter, punchier preset. So FPS, when you do use it, a lot of people have seen it and said, hey, I don't want to use it, it's too washed out. Go over to the black equalizer, knock it down to off, and it's a much more usable preset. And those genre settings are not available on last year's A80L. Another new feature is screen size custom setting, where you can shrink the screen all the way down to this tiny little box. I think that's to help with eye strain, or some people with much larger TVs get overwhelmed. You can shrink it down. It's a pretty cool feature if you find a use for it. They're one of the only manufacturers to offer such a setting. To me, the genre presets are really a big difference, and something I would definitely want if I was buying a TV now. You have your crosshairs, which were there last year. You can also customize them. But as I was saying, the genre settings are something that I really think Sony needed to implement. They can probably take that a step further and actually offer more presets. But definitely a great start having the 3 presets that are very different from one another. They've also finally added the YouTube gaming multi-view, which actually works flawlessly. I don't know who the hell that guy is, but it's a very cool feature if you want to have a walkthrough beside the game as you play it. And I was surprised how well it worked and how clean the image was on both at the same time. So definitely some gaming improvements over last year's A80L. Now, in closing, the Bravia 8 is an excellent OLED TV from Sony. With best-in-class processing with the XR Cognitive processor, very high-end build quality, a new design, improved sound features, it really does have it all. If you are looking for a more affordable option, the A80L is still there, but you've seen the differences in this video on what the Bravia 8 offers. All right, guys, I'm Brian. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing. Take care. Love you guys.
It's better to burn out than to fade away. There can be only one.